Welcome to the Janki Foundation Annual Lecture, and we're extremely fortunate tonight to have someone with us who has studied meditation and the research and the effects of it to a large has pulled together a wonderful volume book. Now that definitely sounds like it's working. Okay, we'll get the volume right in a minute. Just before we start with the main events, I'd like to just know how many of you are here for the first time? So about a third. That's very nice. Welcome. Welcome to Global House. And also we have about, at the moment, 40 people joining us on the webcast, so hello to you as well. And just to let you know that there will be some photographs taken during the event just to capture the proceedings. And if you don't feel comfortable, if you notice the cameras in your direction and you don't feel comfortable with that, please let one of the ushers or the photographer know that you don't like that. So the Janki Foundation is an organisation that really initially came into being to help support a hospital in Rajasthan in India. And it's been doing that for the last 25 years. And as part of that work to raise money and to help that hospital, which is in a deprived rural part of India, we also undertook to take on educational activities, and this lecture is part of that. And generally these activities around the whole area of spirituality and health. And in fact, we've recently updated the name of the charity to the Janki Foundation for Spirituality and Healthcare, because that's what we're really about. That is the heart of our message, that we are mind, body and spirit, that we are souls, and the way we are as souls really has a profound impact on our bodies and our health. And so many of the activities we have will be around this topic. That we have retreats, we've produced educational materials, facilitators manuals on values in healthcare, and some very lovely books, The Heart of Wellbeing and Lifting Your Spirits with CDs and meditations. And in fact, meditation has been very much the core of an activity of the Janki Foundation as a practical tool for helping healthcare professionals really survive the rigours of delivering care in the health service today. So it's going to be very interesting to explore that, and it's a topic that's really at the heart of what the Janki Foundation is all about. But before we start on the talk aspect, of course, part of our lives are also, you know, we're thinking and doing beings, and we're also very artistic and creative beings. And again, we're very lucky tonight to have one such person who works during the day very hard as a GP in South London, but also has done an MBA. She knows her business studies and has studied very hard, but is also an extremely gifted poet. And so we've invited her to kick off tonight by sharing one of her own poems, and she writes really beautifully. So I'm going to invite Rachna to come and share one of her poems with us. So.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and I'm really grateful to be here to be able to share something of myself. So this first poem I wrote last year, and it's called The Oracle Tree of Indra. Indra was a Vedic god, and there's something called Indra's net, which is this net which is infinite in every dimension, and it has a gem in each interconnection. And the gems are arranged in such a manner that they reflect every other gem, and hence the interconnectedness of existence. So this poem is about that. The Oracle Tree of Indra. There exists an untold story that lives and thrives in your soul and mine, and it begins exactly where it never ends, in that unfathomable nothingness, joyful and divine. And if you're quiet, you shall start to hear the discernible whisperings of something you know. Why not try now, in the spaces around whatever is about to unfold, the words in the air and your thoughts together in flow? It begins with an unending land, vast and wide as flecks of dust dancing with the light. And there, a single tree, beautiful, gargantuan, with infinite constellations of swirling tree leaves, each attached, yet in flight, flapping lightly, happily so, on slender, tender-limbed branches that nurture them and sway them gently in the breeze. And together they soar up towards the heavens as far as the silent heart can see, a sky of intricate palmed swirling leaves. And each leaf tells another story, a story for each being that breathes and of each thought and each beat, our past, present and future, inscribed within their veins. And climbing the tree to find your swirling love seems the ultimate feat. But what of the story inside this story? How can each leaf's story be different if their tree's sap is the same? And each leaf that swirls on a branch, does it swirl and dance by itself, or because of the others with a different name? And when the heavens grow dark and silent, there is a sight to behold, for each leaf glows with an exquisite gem, each interconnected in this story untold, each gem mirroring each infinite leaf's heart. And where are you in this story, you might ask? In every leaf, in every gem, you are the tree and the unending land. Why question? Come and see. Just slip out of your own story's mask.
And we'll have more of that later, so that's something to look forward to. So perhaps we could just start now with a minute of silence, just to come into the room and prepare for our speakers and join together as part of that intricate net. Thank you. So nice to come together in silence. It's like a real connection. I forgot to introduce myself, actually. I realised. My name's Sarah Eager, and I'm a consultant psychiatrist and been working in the health service for over 30 years. But I retired from that a couple of years ago, and I now just work in the private sector. But I was very interested to contemplate, really, when I was looking at Professor Michael West's biography, that he too became interested in meditation around the same time that I did. I was in Australia. And I noticed when I first came across the Brahma Kumaris was in 1977, which was when you did your PhD in the effects of meditation. And there's often this sense sometimes of parallel lives, and I've noticed that with other people. Christopher Germer, who has done a lot on mindful self-compassion, when I read his biog, it was 1977, he was travelling around India. So I felt that somehow it was a significant year. But since those early days of interest in meditation, Michael has really done lots of amazing things, and is now in the position of being a senior fellow at the King's Fund. And I think right at the heart of what he's doing there is to try and bring a compassionate practice to healthcare, but informed by his own personal experiences of meditation. So that has involved being a professor of organisational psychology at Lancaster University, and you were a professor at Ashton Business School, so that trajectory of through business and health and now coming together at the King's Fund, and authored many books and articles, but it seems like really your passion at the moment is the compassionate cultures and how teams can work effectively and how leaders can really give compassionate leadership within healthcare settings. So Michael will, as part of his original PhD, and then he wrote a book which I think was published in 1987. So most recently, and that was looking at meditation and where meditation had been researched and people's experienced. And so just this year he's updated that book, and that will be available for sale later if you're interested. But we were both marvelling at really in the last 20, 25 years how much has happened in that whole body of research about meditation and its effects on health, and how mindfulness now is just such a buzzword, and every therapy you can think of has got mindfulness combined with it. So tonight Michael's going to really share with us a bit, really, the essence of that book, where we've got to now with research in meditation, how it's been used in many healthcare treatments and situations and problems that we face today. And then after he's shared that with us, we're going to invite Sister Jayanti and him to have a conversation about their understanding of meditation. And what's really nice about this book that Michael's just recently edited is that he's asked each of the contributors to share their own personal practice. And I think this is what we're really interested in. And it was a question that I had myself, and it's like you've been meditating for many years and then you start thinking, what am I actually doing? When someone asks you, well, what is meditation? And then you have to think, well, what is going on? And that's happening on so many different levels: the physical, physiological, in your brain, the brain transmitters, your thoughts, your own subjective feelings, and then your spiritual journey as well. So you can answer that question on and think about that question on so many levels. But from reading that book and reading Michael's little bit, I know that he's really most at home when he's sitting by his pond in the garden, just sitting, doing nothing in particular, but doing his meditation practice. So I invite you, Michael, to come now and share with us some of your thoughts on this journey. Thank you.
Nope, not yet, not yet. I have a Beyonce microphone, so I'm feeling I should project and sing. But first of all, I want to say I feel an enormous sense of privilege at being asked to speak here this evening. And I'm deeply grateful to Sister Jayanti and Sarah Eager and to the Brahma Kumaris for giving me this really wonderful, splendid opportunity to talk about a topic that has been central in my life for, as Sarah said, however many years it is. So it's a really great privilege, and I'm truly grateful and honored, so thank you. This is the journey I would like to go on with you to talk about meditation and mindfulness and to talk a little bit about the applications of meditation and mindfulness. A lot of research has been conducted to look at how meditation and mindfulness can be applied to some of the problems that face us in our communities and in our societies, and in relation to physical and mental health as well. And also to look at meditation, the outcomes of meditation in non-therapeutic contexts, and then to consider, well, if there are positive benefits of meditation, what are the processes, what are the means by which those benefits come about? To have some understanding of that. And neuroscience has given us really useful insights into what some of those processes might be. And also to talk about the application of meditation in some of the contexts that are really important to us, like schools and the workplace, and what we know from some of the initial research in those areas, before talking about actually some of the themes that come out from the practical experiences that the people who contributed to the book have had over their many, many years of practice of meditation, because I think it gives us some insights into how meditation affects our life experience over time. So I hope you've all come to the right meeting. And as Sarah said, in 1987, I had been interested in meditation for around 15, 16 years, and I did my PhD on the psychology of meditation. And in the mid-1980s, I asked a number of scholars from around the world to share their insights as a result of their work on understanding the psychological and physiological and therapeutic outcomes of meditation practice. And that was a great privilege for me and a great experience. And then 2 years ago, I thought it would be really good to do very much the same thing again. Because so much has changed over that time in terms of the volume of research that's been conducted on meditation, and also the processes of doing research have changed dramatically. So I thought it was time really to produce a new book with all new contributors, apart from me, to that book. And that's the basis. Their knowledge is the basis of my presentation tonight. So I'm drawing on their knowledge and having the privilege of sharing that with you. So what is meditation? If we want a definition, this is maybe a starting place. And I'll give you an opportunity just to read that and maybe digest it. It's some words. Actually, what's fascinating when you begin to study meditation is to understand that we human beings, our species, have been using techniques of meditation for millennia. We know that there are practices that go back at least 3,500 and probably many, many more years than that we've been using these techniques as a species over a long period of time. And they can be found in, of course, virtually every religion. They have been concentrated particularly in Hinduism and Buddhism, but you find in Jainism too practices, in Judaism, certainly in Christianity from some of the early Christian mystics. Meditation was very much a part of Christian practice. The Kyrie eleison prayer was a kind of mantra meditation. And you see it in Sufism also. Not only in relation to religion, but if we look across cultures and across the geographies of the world, we see these practices being conducted almost everywhere. So the polar Inuit people of Greenland had a practice of holding a small hard handstone and sitting in front of a large soft stone and carving a circle continually over a long period of time. Some sometimes for up to 2 or 3 days, to induce a particular state, a particular focus in their experience. You see it in the practices of some Native American groups practicing a breathing meditation that's identical to those used in India and those used in Japan, for example. We see it in North and South America. We see it in the chanting of mystics in many countries on the African continent to induce a particular mystical or spiritual state. So wherever we look around the world in terms of cultures and religions, we see that these practices have been endemic for many, many years. And they've also been used in secular contexts. So you see great mystic poets talking about the repetition of the I am words to induce a particular state of equanimity, of connection, of calm, of insight, or of transcending the self. So these practices are incredibly widespread, but of course within India and within religions located in India, they've been particularly concentrated. And there is a very sophisticated understanding of consciousness and mind and meditation, in particular in those contexts. What we've seen in the last 15 years is this sudden huge growth in interest in what's being called mindfulness, which is kind of difficult to separate out from meditation. The elements of mindfulness are awareness of thoughts and emotions and sights and sounds, encouraging people to be aware of experience, of sights, of sounds, of tastes, of smells, of the moment. It's encouraging people to sustain attention, to practice sustaining their attention rather than letting their minds be carried away on these multiple rapid trains of thought that we have. And it also recommends a non-judgmental acceptance of whatever's in experience here and now, of just being open to experience rather than being very attracted or attached to particular experiences or being averse to them and trying to push them away. And also a focus on the present moment, of being aware of the here and now. We know increasingly that present moment focusedness is associated with good health and well-being for people. And this focus on mindfulness has been perhaps made particularly powerful by the work of an American psychologist, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who has led this movement and encouraged the use of mindfulness in therapeutic contexts. And it's just this enormous growth in interest and application in almost every major institution in the Western world. And here in this country, you see universities with dedicated departments focused on mindfulness in, for example, Bangor, Exeter, Oxford universities. So there's been this huge growth. And it's quite, in a sense, hard to separate out what we mean by mindfulness and meditation. But what's particularly characteristic of the mindfulness movement is the secular context. So it's taking meditation out of a spiritual or philosophical context and more into a secular context. So what I would like to do is now to share with you some of the results of the research that has been conducted over recent years particularly, but I want to preface it by saying two things. When I talk about the research that looks at the application of meditation in therapeutic contexts, like dealing with pain or addiction or dealing with physiological problems, the typical research method is to compare meditation or mindfulness as an intervention with other treatments that are known to be effective, or with other treatments that provide an equivalent amount of time and attention for the people who are practicing meditation. And the other point to make, I think, that's important is, as I said, the research volume in this area has increased enormously over recent years. So the way that research is now reported and used is very much based on what are called meta-analysis. So rather than relying on individual research studies, what we can do is accumulate the results of many research studies in an area, accumulate the data, aggregate the data, so we get a much more reliable sense of what research is telling us. If we just rely on one study, it could be that that was really not well conducted, or the experimenters might have faked their data. It happens. Or it could be to do with really poor conduct of the research in some way. But when we aggregate data across many studies, it gives us a much more rigorous and robust sense of what we can know from the results of the research. Does that make sense? So let's turn to the first area, which is to do with pain management. Pain is endemic in OECD countries. 1 in 5 people report that they suffer with chronic pain, and it blights people's lives. It blights their mental health as well as their relationships. So there is a meta-analysis that's been conducted of 47 studies, quite a large group of studies, and there is evidence of a small improvement in pain severity when compared with active controls. So that's really encouraging. What we want to see is that there's some improvement. I think one of the points I want to make to you is that we can easily get carried away and think meditation is the solution to all problems. Clearly it is not. But when we see a small improvement over active controls on the basis of 47 studies, that's very encouraging indeed. And also what is associated with that improvement is that people have lower anxiety, reduced stress, reduced depression, and less desire for the use of opioids amongst those who are opiate abusers to deal with their pain. So it's an encouraging picture, and there has been a lot of discussion about how these effects come about. One possible mechanism is that people accept anticipated pain rather more as a result of using meditation to be aware of the pain that they're experiencing, to focus on the pain, to feel its contours, to sense its depth, to understand that pain is changing constantly. It's not some constant stimulus that is unchanging, that it changes its shape, its texture, and that focus on pain gives people a greater understanding of the pain and also a sense of having more control when they are anticipating it. One of the things we know that happens with pain is that people firstly deal with the pain, but then very often, because they resist the pain and get frightened of the pain, that in a sense there's a new second pain, which is that resistance and that fear and that feeling of desperation and that feeling of being out of control. Meditation seems to help people understand pain and therefore to feel that they have more control over it, and there's less anticipatory stress associated with the pain. And also, because meditation practice is about opening and accepting moment-to-moment experience, that seems to be associated with a much greater acceptance of pain, not in a kind of passive victim sense, but an acceptance of the reality of the pain, and also a compassionate acceptance, so a greater compassion for self. And interestingly, that seems to generalize to others in pain too. And, of course, through the practice of meditation, as those who practice meditation here will know, that meditation offers an equanimity. There is a place of stillness, a place of peace, and that equanimity ripples out into day-to-day experience, and so can help those who are dealing with pain. Make sense? Thank you. So the second area, and I'm going to go through these reasonably quickly because there are so many vast literatures, it is addiction. Addiction to alcohol, cigarettes, gambling, all sorts of addictions are pervasive in our society. The work on meditation and mindfulness in relation to addictive disorders is based on the accumulated data from 24 separate studies showing that that those interventions significantly decrease alcohol and illicit drug usage, but also seem to be associated with successful smoking cessation. There's preliminary encouraging evidence as well in relation to, as you can see, eating disorders and weight loss programs. And again, the mechanisms seem to be to do with decreased craving, somehow through the practice of meditation and mindfulness, being aware in the moment, being aware of my sensations, my experiences, my thoughts, my feelings. I catch the cravings earlier in their unfurling. I catch the cravings earlier in their unfurling, before they are really powerful. So these cravings well up. Do you know how feelings well up? You know when you're watching a movie and you suddenly feel a sob starting to come from somewhere deep down? So these cravings in the same way well up, but through developing a more powerful awareness of moment-to-moment experience, we catch the cravings earlier, and therefore when they're less powerful and less strong, and can let them go. And we also seem to be less reactive to the cues around us which cause us to abuse drugs. So when I see a picture of somebody on a billboard drinking a glass of wine, that might cause me to go into the nearest bar and start to drink again. But somehow it seems to be that there is less cue reactivity amongst people who are trained in meditation and mindfulness. Again, I think maybe because they're more aware of those cues and catch the reaction before they become too powerful and propel them in a particular direction of drug use. And interestingly as well, the data seem to suggest that people have reduced shame when they practice meditation and mindfulness, more self-compassion through experiencing the self in a non-judgmental way, being open to my experience of myself rather than judging myself and criticizing myself and creating shame, which feeds into the craving for alcohol or illicit substances or whatever it is that the addiction is focused on. People then have more resistance. How are you doing? You okay? Good. So the third area is to do with cancer. And there's been a lot of research in this area because meditation and mindfulness has been used in the context of treating people with cancer for many years now. And there have been several different meta-analyses showing medium positive effects on mood and reduced distress amongst patients with various types of cancer, but very large positive effects on stress and anxiety for women with breast cancer. Of course, stress and anxiety are hugely prevalent amongst those suffering with cancer, so it's powerful for people who are suffering with cancer to be able to spend time in a place where they can feel some equanimity, some stillness, some freedom from the anxiety and the worry. And Linda Carlson, who authored the chapter on physiological benefits associated with meditation in the book, has recently completed a review of all of the studies and concluded that there's strong evidence for the effectiveness of meditation and mindfulness in the treatment of cancer. And strong evidence is a meaningful term. It's saying, really, the evidence is robust and rigorous. Based on all of these studies, the evidence is robust and rigorous. And what we see is, amongst patients, reduced stress. We've talked about that already. And interestingly, increased social support. And it may be that one of the consequences of practicing meditation and mindfulness is that we somehow are able to connect with others more readily. So what we see certainly is improved relationships that people report with the practice of meditation, and maybe as a result of the improved relationship with self, the greater compassion for self, it also enables us to then have more compassionate and improved relationships with others, and to be able to call on social support rather than feeling I should be managing this or I should control this, but to be compassionate to self and ask for support. And also spirituality. which seems incredibly important, and sleep quality, because when people are facing the possibility of death, spirituality can be hugely important and hugely comforting for them in the struggle that they face. But interestingly, what we also see is this does not just affect, as it were, the psychological environment, but the biological markers indicate that meditation and mindfulness produce a reduced or less inflammatory environment, which is really important in terms of treating the cancers. And then there are a variety of other physical areas that have been studied. I'm not going to go through all of them in depth. Fibromyalgia, there is some positive evidence that meditation interventions are helpful. Blood pressure, generally positive effects of meditation and mindfulness practice on hypertension. The data is less encouraging about cardiovascular disorders generally, but blood pressure generally positive. Diabetes, it seems that meditation and mindfulness are beneficial for improving well-being and also people's ability to control the diabetes. And this is as effective as other self-management treatments. So it seems given the huge impact that diabetes is having in our health system in this country and is going to continue to have, it's really important to find interventions that help people with diabetes to have more control over their diseases. It currently costs the NHS something like £7 billion a year. And putting that in context, it's probably about accounting for about 1/10 of all of the spending on diseases in the NHS. Irritable bowel syndrome, there's strong evidence that meditation and mindfulness practices show superiority on symptoms compared with other treatments, and quality of life and anxiety and distress. And it appears to be stress management is particularly important. People learning to be quieter, to be stiller, to calm, not to fight so much the disorder, but to find ways of managing it more effectively. The mechanisms, rheumatoid arthritis, organ transplant, the evidence is thin, but generally positive effects on psychological well-being. So the mechanisms we know in dealing with physical disorders, rumination and worry are problematic. The more time we spend in negative emotion, chronic negative emotions, the more damage we're doing to our immune systems and to our mental health, of course, as well. And meditation and mindfulness practices seem to really reduce rumination and worry by giving people some distance from their thoughts. Rather than being on the hamster wheel of our thoughts, we step away from the hamster wheel and see it spinning, and can begin to make choices about whether to keep it spinning or have times of peace and times of stillness. Non-judging acceptance seems really important. Instead of spending all our time evaluating, this is bad, this is good, I'm bad, I'm good, that by learning to have an acceptance of the moment, that it helps in terms of the physiological stresses which cause our physical illnesses very often. And present moment awareness. I've mentioned this a couple of times already. We do understand more and more from looking at human health and well-being that learning to be in the here and now is really good in terms of our well-being. Being aware of this moment, being aware of where I am, being aware of the flowers on the stage, being aware of the beautiful pictures that are aside the words, that these things help us to be more effectively. But also important is the credibility of interventions. People seem to like meditation. There's an almost intuitive recognition that this is a good thing to do. This feels like something that's a right thing to do. And the likability of interventions as well, the liking for interventions. So those matter a great deal in terms of people's commitment to using these interventions to make a difference in their lives. And in relation to mental health, there is an enormous amount of research, By 2012, there were 500 articles examining the impact of meditation and mental health being published every year in reputable journals. So it's a huge body of research evidence. And what that evidence tells us, this is a meta-analysis of 209 studies, 209 separate studies, really carefully conducted studies, is improvements in depression and anxiety, the key mental health problems which face us in our healthcare system. Improvements in depression and anxiety, not superior to other treatments that we know are effective, but nevertheless offering a powerful, if you like, means of dealing with depression and anxiety, another powerful means. And when we combine meditation and mindfulness with therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, they seem to really add value. And again, for many people, they are really welcome. People adhere to them because they like the intervention. They prefer it, for example, to using chemical interventions. The mechanisms appear to be to do with attention regulation. And what this refers to is that through the practice of meditation, we become better at controlling where we place our attention. So when we start to have negative thoughts, oh, that person didn't smile at me, that's because they don't like me, I'm a worthless person, I'm never going to change. So because we have, through practice in meditation, our attention is more, if you like, under our control rather than being reactive to external factors, then we're better able to manage those processes which may lead to depression and anxiety. Present moment awareness, I've talked about, non-judgmental, openness and acceptance, and emotion regulation, of increasing emotional stability. So when I have that reaction, that person didn't smile, oh, I'm feeling bad, that I can recognize those emotional reactions and then have choices about whether to allow them to well up even more or just to let them go. Just to let them go. Body awareness seems to be particularly important, learning to be aware of the feelings in my body. So as I become aware of tensions which give me, which make me feel anxious, then I can choose again to let those tensions go. I can let them melt away just by being aware of them. I'm sitting here tense. I can let that go. But if we don't notice it in the first place, we can't let it go. So overall, the conclusion from this research is that there is real potential for helping people struggling with a wide range of problems, and that these techniques of meditation and mindfulness are very useful for us. In non-therapeutic contexts, what we see, in other words, for people who just take up meditation not as a way of treating themselves or being treated for a disorder, the evidence is in general very promising. 163 studies published by Peter Sedlmayr 2 or 3 years ago, and you can see very positive outcomes, and also in relation to some of our perceptual processes as well. And some decreases in negative personality traits like neuroticism and anxiety, consistent with what I've talked about already. Interestingly, there seem to be differential effects depending on the type of meditation that people practice, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So what are the mechanisms? I've talked quite a bit about them already. We know from studies of neuroscience that there are consistent changes in brain structure associated with meditation, particularly in the areas that are related to awareness. You know, that awareness. Be aware in this moment. Be aware of the here and now. That affects a center in our brains. Those areas seem to change permanently as a result of meditation practice. So too areas in relation to body awareness, memory, self and emotional regulation, and greater hemispheric communication. In other words, with meditation practices, the different parts of the brain seem to communicate more than they do if we didn't practice meditation. So when we look at the changes in people's brain structures over time, experienced meditators seem to be able to exercise more executive attention and control. It's like when we practice meditation over a long period of time, we know what's going on for us. So we can make choices in the moment much more. I'm driving my car. There's a person coming in the other direction, and there's a car that is in that person's way, and they pull out, even though it was my right of way. Irritation beginning to rise. But through the practice of meditation, we catch those feelings earlier, and so can make choices about whether to let them unfurl or just let them evaporate. Interestingly, the evidence is that there's diminished decline in grey matter volume, in brain volume with age, and also more sustained attention with age. And I was looking at the results of some research presented in Brussels 2 weeks ago from a very big center in Berlin, showing how meditation practices seem to be associated with prevention of Alzheimer's and reductions in symptomatology associated with Alzheimer's, which is enormously encouraging given the growth of problems with Alzheimer's. More detached but heightened awareness of self. What this means is that people seem to have a heightened awareness of self, but without the emotional investment. I must be presenting myself in a way that's positive. I mustn't look bad. I feel afraid of how I'm going to look with these people. Do you know what I mean? This chatter that goes on in our minds all of the time. The evidence seems to be that there's more detached awareness of self, awareness of present moment. And meditation type specific effects on the brain. So when we look at loving kindness meditation, practices of meditation to really deepen our compassion for others and our kindness for others, the research suggests that that does seem to lead to changes in brain structure in the areas associated with loving kindness. Meditation practices that involve maybe focused attention on, let's say, a candle flame or whatever, don't seem to produce those specific changes. They produce changes more associated with concentration. Does that make sense? Fascinating area of research too. So I wanted also to mention the research in schools and workplaces. This is just a summary of really what I've been saying about the way that meditation changes lives. I've talked about all of them, so I think I won't spend time going through each, unless there's anything you see there that you want me to say a little bit about. Do shout if there's something, please. Better sleep. Well, it seems to be that when people worry less, when there's less rumination, that when they wake they go back to sleep more easily, but they also sleep more quickly in the first place. Actually, the research on insomnia and meditation was among the first areas researched back in the 1970s. So we've got quite consistent evidence about the impact of meditation practice on sleep. And I think it's to do both with reductions in stress and equanimity and less rumination over time. Please. Compassion. Okay, so it's... of course, there are some meditations that are focused on love and compassion, so they do seem to evoke compassion. But it also seems to be that when we practice meditation and we go to, as it were, the heart of ourselves, that we discover more the basic motivations which are part of what it is to be human. And altruism and compassion, we know, are really important characteristics of the human species. You can demonstrate compassion and altruism in 7-month-old babies. It's a characteristic of our species. So when we clear away all of the undergrowth of this stuff that goes on our minds, we somehow seem to get to a place of greater love in terms of an acceptance of ourselves, as well as for others around us. So very briefly, There's lots of work going on in lots of institutions. There's a lot of work going on in schools. And some of the meta-analysis give encouraging insights into the effects of mindfulness practice for school children in these areas. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, impulsiveness, aggression, oppositional behavior, going up against authority, going against people all of the time. Positive effects in relation to these. And also lots of evidence on the value for school staff of having mindfulness and meditation practice. But I think it's important to say that we also know the context of these things is important. So these things are not going to work unless you have schools that also have a vision of the kind of place they want to be, where there is a real commitment to developing the skills of teachers and young people, where there is respect and support and compassion and engagement of everybody within the school, so that it's a community that is strong and compassionate, and where there's a commitment to learning and innovation and working together as communities and as teams, and where parents and the community are involved in a positive way within schools. In the workplace, meditation is being used really, really widely. Google has been championing the use of mindfulness practices in its organization for many years, and this gentleman has been leading that approach. But almost, virtually all of the organizations I now go into, particularly in the health service, people are practicing meditation and mindfulness techniques as a way of improving their functioning and the functioning of the workplace. Here in London, Frank Bond and his colleagues at Goldsmiths College have worked with over 2,000 employees, training them in acceptance and commitment therapy, which has a mindfulness meditation component to it, and trained also hundreds of psychologists in using those techniques. There's a lovely study by Barbara Fredrickson, which I have to mention, the study with 139 working adults in a manufacturing factory in America, and they were trained in loving-kindness meditation over a 6-month period, and a very carefully conducted piece of research showing these really positive outcomes. As Sarah said, I had the privilege of editing this book and learning from all of these scholars who had reviewed all of the work and done a lot of the research in the area. I asked them to describe their own personal meditation journeys, and I have to say that that's my favorite part of the book, because most of them had been practicing meditation for 30 or 40 years. One of them had spent 10 years in a Zen Buddhist monastery in South Korea. She meditated 10 hours a day for 6 months of every year for 10 years. Many of the contributors had multiple trips to India and spent long time in ashrams, and so when they described their personal journeys, I was really interested to see the themes. And these tell a rather different, a richer story from just the research results I've described. They talk about changes in daily awareness, the sense of being aware of each moment here and now, becoming much clearer and more powerful over time, profound peace of mind, growth of love and happiness through their practice over the years, a deeper sense of the meaning of existence and an understanding of the conditioning of minds, of how our minds become conditioned to react, and we almost become slaves of our minds rather than being able to step away. More mindful, kind and compassionate relationships. And they talked about that meditation was not just a palliative, not just a way of achieving a superimposed equanimity, but was actually an existential and experiential inquiry, a moving towards the difficult, to engage with the difficult in life, exploring death, exploring moment-to-moment awareness, and sharing the learning in service of others. Almost all of them talked about the joy and the gratitude they had experienced in sharing their learning about meditation with others. Not just the research evidence, but through the practice of meditation, training people in meditation. And the sense of wisdom and presence. And that word comes up a lot. Meditation is about being present, but also what it seems to give us is a sense of presence in our moment-to-moment experience. and balance and privilege and gratitude and joy. And one of them talked about joy, the inner throb at the heart of everything, even sadness. This is the little place in my garden. There's a pond here where I go to sit, if it's not too cold, every day. And what meditation practice has done for me, I think, is helped me to engage with the wonder of being in each moment, the sense of joy, of still completeness and of love that comes from the peace in each moment. Om Shanti.
And where's that, Michael? Is that Holy Island? Isle of Arran. Close to Holy Island. Thank you very much, Michael. I was just thinking that as a good scholar, you took us through all the evidence first, which somehow it's good to know that. I think we're all happy to know that meditation is good for us and that the evidence shows it. But really what's most interesting are people's stories and the narrative. And even within medicine now, I think, even though we know we need the stats and the evidence and that, that's the kind of thing that makes it come alive for us, are hearing people's stories and their own experience. So shall we just take a moment to just think about what Michael shared with us and see what comes up for you in this moment, if anything, there are any questions or insights or realizations, and just to notice that. Thank you. So there will be a chance, hopefully, if we have enough time towards the end, if you have some questions. But before we do that, I'd now like to invite Michael and Sister Jayanti to come up on the stage to have a conversation once the chairs are actually there for them to sit on. And as they're just rearranging the stage, most of you may be aware that of Sister Jayanti, but for those of you who are not, Sister Jayanti is the European director of the Brahma Kumaris and has been meditating for over 45 years. And Jayanti is someone very dear to our hearts and well known to us because she has been the main person who's translated for Western people the understanding of the meditation practice as taught by the Brahma Kumaris of Raj Yoga, translating that to a Western mind, into the English language, the concepts, the words, the ideas, and the people, the relationship of the people, because she started doing this at a very young age, and her mother knew the founder, and Jayanti met the founder as well. So she's our connection, our umbilical cord to the beginning and the origin of this practice. So she's very precious to us. And precious to so many people that she's travelling pretty much non-stop. In fact, I think you must probably live in another dimension, Jayanti, because you don't have a chance for your feet to touch the ground. And I don't know that you could even recover from jet lag. You have to live beyond time in order to do all the travelling and meet all the people that you do. So I'd like to invite you to both come up on the stage, And I'm hoping that you're curious about each other, and that you have, that you have some things you might like to discuss and talk. I think you two are it. All right, you two are there, and I'm on one end. I don't know which, but whichever you're not, I'll be. I suppose when I was thinking about this, two particular things I was curious about, because I know, Michael, you talked about it, the here and nowness, the sort of mindfulness, focusing on the here and now, which we might, in some cases, call the eminence, the sort of the experience in this moment, in the present moment. And yet there's also a lot of meditation practices which are kind of like taking you beyond, in a sense, the transcendent, and connecting with the divine or another energy or higher energy. So I'm curious about that. You may or may not be, but that might be an interesting question. And also another thing that, like what are we doing when we meditate? And that sort of paradox of that it's a practice, and are we striving? Are we aiming? Are we're trying to get somewhere? Or is it something that really is innately our truth and it is us, and we just need to relax into it? So that sense of those two things. So that might be something you might like to talk about, but don't let me pressurise you, but just to kick it off.
So in relation to the first point, which I understand to be that it's a question about the extent to which we practice meditation, which is focusing on the here and now, versus meditations which are more perhaps transcendent and focused on connection with the divine. So I can talk from my experience, and my experience is when I sit by my pond, and a bumblebee floats by, and I hear a fish jump in the water, and the wind goes by, and I have some thought, that there are times of real stillness that are very here and now, but actually also are imbued with feelings of such beauty and gratitude and privilege and love that it is transcendent, it is connecting. And maybe, when we talk about the comparison of secular versus spiritual approaches to meditation, that sometimes what we don't say on the tin is, if you practice this over a long period of time, it will probably take you to experiences which are far more meaningful than just maybe the short-term therapeutic benefits that you're seeking. That's my experience.
It's interesting because I've been fascinated by the work you've done and mindfulness and how that fits in within Raj Yoga meditation. And for me it's a bit of both, as you were saying, that there is that experience of the Om, of Om Shanti. Om, I am, and just going deep inside and coming to that awareness of the peace that is there within, the stillness that there is there within. And so that's very much here and now, and it's something that you can do very quickly. You need to develop the skill, the practice, the awareness. Dadi Janki, you know her, and at one time, many years ago, she'd said, I use Om Shanti as a mantra for myself, not speaking it, but just internally remembering it at least 100 times a day. And what she meant was that in every situation, here and now, if I can just turn inwards and connect with myself in that way, just here, it makes such a big difference to my response to the situation and to people. And then, yes, of course, very much yoga, the term of union. And so this state of Om Shanti and the awareness of the inner being, then I can go beyond and come to that connection with the divine and really truly experience that there is a relationship with the divine, not my imagination or not theory, but a very real feeling of that warmth, that comfort, the love, the power, whatever it is the soul needs at that moment. And so it's both. It is the benefit of just being very still and having the capacity to deal with whatever is going on, but also to go beyond. And yes, as you say, I know a person who stated at the very outset, I don't believe in God, I don't want to believe in God. And so that's fine, you can meditate. And they started with the awareness of the inner being, the self, and some years later, in fact 9 years later, precisely, a long time, but they telephoned to say, tell Daddy, I believe in God. So it brought them to that awareness. So yes, you can start on a very secular level and just focused on what I need to do at this moment, but it opens up other aspects of your consciousness so that you're able to tune in and feel that higher presence.
So one of the thoughts I have about the practice of meditation is that it enables us to be in this moment. It enables us much more to be present. And in a sense, it enables us to learn to be in this existence, on this planet, as this member of this species, in this solar system, in this galaxy, in this universe. And the evidence we have increasingly is that maybe this is an infinite universe and maybe there are multiple universes. I think we understand more now that possibly all of this is infinite. I think for people it can be a frightening thought. But I think through the practice of meditation and engaging with that sense of being, rather than being lost in all of this stuff which goes on in our heads, that evokes a sense of wonder and gratitude and joy. But I'm also aware that engaging with that reality of being can be frightening for people. So there's some sense of it needing to be a gentle process.
I think that if you begin with the practice, then it's not frightening in that sense. I think when there's a lot of theory and you get lost in the theory, that's sometimes daunting. And I know that when I think about infinity, and I'm thinking about what is it that's endless, if it's just a thinking state, it's difficult. But if I'm actually experiencing the connection with the divine and the infinite love of the divine, or even the infinite peace, that becomes very beautiful. And so then it's not daunting at all. And I'm just aware that there's another concept that you begin to be aware of, which is not usually part of Western thinking. And that is, instead of looking at things from a linear perspective, you start looking at things from a cyclical perspective. And I'm aware of that through the whole concept of infinity. And so no beginning and no end. On the level of theory, it's nonsense. How can it be? But in the experience of infinity, eons and eons and cycles and more cycles and many cycles. So there's new aspects of truth and reality that we hadn't been aware of that open up as the thinking mind doesn't push its way, but a new type of awareness comes in and a new understanding comes in. And it changes perspective about the little things that we get caught up with on a daily basis. And so the stress, the anxiety, the worry, all of that, that really begins to fade away. And so, I mean, huge statistics that you were sharing, amazing things that have been researched and discovered. But yes, it is a reality that when you meditate and you're able to see things from a very different perspective, those things really are very insignificant. And you can feel that, and you can sense that, my mind is now getting back into a limited, narrow perspective. And again, if I take a moment to pause and step back, I can come back to that bigger picture in which that's much, much reduced. So there was a name that I recognized because I met her, Fredrickson, Barbara Fredrickson, and she was the one you quoted about positive feelings and emotions. And so I'd had a very interesting conversation with her about that, so I was fascinated by that too. So yes, now we have the tools to be able to see what are the positive feelings and emotions that meditation's able to generate and how meditation sustains all that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
So Barbara Fredrickson has developed a theory called broaden and build about positive emotion, and it basically proposes, and the evidence supports this, that when we feel positive emotions, we have more of a divergent focus in the world. So, if we're in an elevator and we're feeling positive, we're more likely to talk to other people. And what that does is it makes us less afraid of talking to people in elevators as time goes by. So her idea is that through feeling positive emotion, we broaden our behavioral repertoire. We try out things that we otherwise would not have tried out. And that builds on our ability to engage with the world more effectively. So if we can reduce chronic negative emotion, because negative emotion from time to time is very important and valuable. There are times when we need to be afraid and times when we need to be ashamed. But if we can reduce chronic negative emotion and increase positive emotion, we engage much more with being and world, I think is the powerful theory that she's put forward, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. Encouraging positive emotion and reducing chronic negative emotion is important. We know if you induce positive emotion in 3-year-olds, they produce more creative paintings and they play more altruistically with other 3-year-olds. Same is true for 63-year-olds, by the way. If you induce positive emotion with doctors, they make better medical diagnoses. If you induce positive emotions in people and expose them to cold viruses, they're much less likely to contract the virus. But
how do you induce positive emotions?
Give people hugs or nice sweeties like we had. But you asked a question about...
Or meditate.
Or meditate, exactly, yeah. You asked a question about striving, Sarah. And my understanding of your question was that if our approach to meditation is one of striving rather than letting go and acceptance, will that be less effective? Was that?
No, it was just observing the paradox that you do need some discipline in a way. It is a practice, and even if you notice your concentration is going somewhere, if you bring it back. So just that balance, I suppose. I don't know, Janti, have you got any thoughts on that? Do you know what I mean?
I've experienced both. So yes, I do know what you mean. I know that sometimes I think I really want to be able to connect. And so there's that striving that comes in, which actually is a bit of a struggle. But I think it's the easy Raj Yoga. And the word easy is actually supposed to be part of the title of Raj Yoga, Easy Raj Yoga, Sahaj Raj Yoga. So the easy Raj Yoga is that I come to the awareness of who I am very swiftly, quietly, without a struggle, and then let my thoughts with love connect with the divine, instead of thinking, this is what I have to do. And so I think that when I can do that, it's a very sweet experience. And of course, and it's dependent very much on what's happened through the day. If through the day I haven't taken a few moments to pause and just come back to the awareness within, and it's just been very externalized and it's been engaged in things out there, then coming back to that stillness takes time. Yeah. And so that's the struggle. And then again, connecting takes time. But yes, I understand that it's important to keep the discipline. So it's not that I say, well, I'm not going to bother with it anymore. But no, hold on, patience with the self, compassion for the self, and just to work with it. But of course, when there has been a day when there's been more attention, we use this term traffic control, pausing, and it can become just an external discipline again. But when it's done on an inner level, with that desire to connect with myself again and again through the day, then it's a very sweet, natural experience of awareness and connection. And so the yoga becomes a very easy and natural thing. And in fact, then it's not even just at that time of sitting that you feel that sense of yoga, but you're connected through the day also. And so generally everything becomes a lot sweeter.
So I think certainly what I've found in talking to people who take up meditation and practice is that it's really important to cultivate an attitude of openness and acceptance, openness and contentment with the practice. Because I think people do strive and say, I'm doing it wrong, my mind is wandering, and there's this tension and this struggle that's created. But actually openness and contentment and not striving and no expectations and acceptance and, as you say, compassion. So I've drifted off on a train of thought again, and a compassionate reaction to that and gently coming back. And I think that practice in that sense of openness and contentment and compassion and no expectations over time produces, as you say, a sweetness to the experience of meditation that becomes almost self-reinforcing. It's easy to go sit by the pond when it's not a painful process. But also in the sense of practice as my practice is meditation. So in my day, my practice is meditation. In the meetings I sit in, when I'm waiting to stand up here on the stage, my practice is being present, meditating in the moment, not just in the time sitting by the pond.
Is there anything, this is your big opportunity, is there anything you'd like to ask Jayanti? If you had one thing you'd like to ask her, what would it be?
I think it's a question that many people who practice meditation ask, and I think it's a really fundamental question and it's a question about how do we, and we had this conversation once before, about how do we embed that awareness and that presence in these busy lives we lead? How do we make it more part of, how do we ensure it suffuses more into our lives than just the time sitting by the pond?
The pond is a beautiful metaphor for me because I don't have a pond to sit by.
Come visit.
I'll take you up on that. I think starting the day with a disciplined practice, that's important, and that gets our thoughts and feelings and awareness moving in the right direction. And then through the day, like you said, when you're in a meeting, before you meet a patient or you meet anybody else, you prepare yourself, not just with information, but with an awareness. And so as I begin to see the value of this, it empowers me to continue this practice more and more. And it's very visible. If there isn't that quiet preparation, there isn't that togetherness. And so you see how important it is and how useful it is. And it's a good incentive to keep doing it. And yes, when we were sitting before you came up to share, it was very clear that there was a preparation that was happening, which was a very quiet one of stillness. And of course, then it was shown through the way in which you shared. And so you use meditation in that way. And because it's useful, then you find that it's something that you want to continue to do. And you can pull yourself up when you realize that you haven't done it. And so you experiment. And you win a few, you lose a few, but you decide you want to keep winning. And so you continue to do it.
Thank you.
If I can do it. There's a question I'd like to ask Michael before you open it up. I think it was last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, time flies, but there was a situation in which there was a speaker who spoke about secular mindfulness, and then another speaker who spoke about the divine in mindfulness and meditation of Raj Yoga. And you spoke beautifully about making the bridge between the two. You were the third speaker. And because it appeared to be quite divisive at one point, very secular presentation, and another one that focused very much on the divine. But you shared in a very beautiful way something that bridged it all. And so I'd like you to say something about that now. Many people feel that, yes, meditation or mindfulness on a secular level is very useful. But what is then the transition to the next stage?
So I think it has to do with practicing these techniques. I think many people are attracted to mindfulness because it doesn't have any apparent spiritual, religious, philosophical trappings that they would find uncomfortable. And that mindfulness is a way then of practicing something that feels intuitively right. And I think with practice over time, what we achieve is a greater presence, an ability to be present, an ability to experience more each moment as it is. So to see the flowers, to smell the scent, to see the smiles of people around. Because we become more present, because we become less encumbered, life becomes more joyful. There is more of a sense of privilege, more of a sense of gratitude. And I think through that practice over time, and through achieving a struggling way of practicing, and that imbuing itself into our day-to-day lives, that the miracle of our existence and the miracle of our connection with each other And the miracle of our connection with everything else, I believe, becomes more and more apparent, not as an intellectual idea, but as an experience. And so it feels as though over time that the practice of secular mindfulness and meditation techniques has the potential to take us to a profoundly spiritual way of being, whether we give it a name of having a particular religion or particular belief system, but I think it has the potential to take us to a place of profound spirituality and profound sense of privilege and gratitude for our existence and for our connection with all.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. We have just a couple of minutes. We have time for a couple of questions. This gentleman here, do have a drink. It's quite warm up here.
Thank you.
Your unambiguous enthusiasm for meditation is quite infectious. But in light of some recent critiques, and I'm thinking of the work of Miguel Farias from Bristol, whether you think some element of caution might also be necessary.
I didn't catch the name of the person.
I didn't catch the name.
Miguel Farias.
Yeah.
Do you know them?
No.
Because he's been quite critical of this mindfulness craze that's sweeping the country. It's a bit like TM in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, TM was supposed to be this magical cure. And there were hundreds of studies. Exactly the same things were being said about TM as are being said about mindfulness. And then it just disappeared. And because the Beatles were backing it. You know, you remember the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and George Harrison, and they all went to India. But then it just fizzled out. And I'm wondering whether we ought to exercise some caution, a critique, instead of just accepting it mindlessly.
Yeah.
So to speak.
So there is certainly evidence, and there are case studies of people, particularly people who are damaged in some way, taking up meditation and having really difficult experiences or being quite damaged in the process, particularly when people immerse themselves, when they already have some, let's say, susceptibility, and they immerse themselves in long hours of meditation practice. And there's certainly evidence and case studies that can happen. And so we need to be cautious in the therapeutic application of these approaches for that reason. But I think that the promise of these techniques, what's important about them, is that it really helps us to see the workings of our minds. And a lot of the difficulties we have come about from our thought processes, from our associated emotions, from bodily processes as well. And we are often so driven by those and by the conditioning that we've had since our childhood to conform to ways of thinking that we become like fishes in water. We have no awareness of the water that we are, in some sense, trapped in. So, of course, there are limits to the beneficial applications of meditation. It's not going to solve your motor car problems. It's not going to solve sometimes relationship problems. And there are limits in terms of exposing people who are susceptible inappropriately. But I think the promise of meditation in helping us to be aware of the functioning of our minds and emotions and giving us the choices about how we deal with thoughts and emotions is really very powerful and is actually in some sense unique in terms of an intervention. I believe that it's really important that we, at this time as a species, find solutions which are much deeper than the kind of symptom treatment problems. when we look around in our planet, we see that what we're doing as a species is clearly not right. We're eradicating all other species. We are polluting the planet. And it feels as though our ability to exist effectively is not good enough. And all of this is mediated through our minds and our thoughts and so on. And I think that if we can use meditation as a way of understanding our conditioning and our thought processes, it does give us a means, an important means, of dealing with the problems that face us. Personally, I would think it would be great if our political leaders practiced meditation and compassion. If we could encourage our leaders to practice meditation and compassion, to develop their own compassionate values, not just for each other as a species, but for the planet as a whole, we would begin to make progress. So I think it is important to be aware of the limitations, but that shouldn't prevent us from grasping the opportunities that these practices provide.
Jayanti, did you want to add to that? Being the Brahma Kumaris representative at UN climate change conference, or to go to the macro level, but the caution and the issues that Michael raised?
The aspect of caution is something that I've been aware of, and we actually say to people, make sure that there is some sort of mental stability before you come into meditation. And if there is a history of any other type of behavior, it's actually better just to get professional help rather than expect meditation to deal with your problems. So yes, there is that caution. But yes, it's a fact that if our consciousness is very limited and our consciousness is driven by ego and I and my, then materialism, consumerism and destruction is what we see happening all around us. And meditation is very definitely the way in which one is able to go beyond the limited awareness of the I and the ego and come to that understanding of my relationship with others and the planet and my responsibility to others and the planet. And if we were to change our consciousness, I think that we can have a better world in so many different ways. And climate change is an issue that I have a lot of information about, and it's all available out there. And I wonder how close we are to the point when it's now going to become irreversible. So it's not a doomsday prediction, but it's a fact of awareness that we have to change our consciousness to be able to continue as a species and allow the planet to continue in the way that we know and love.
One more question, just here.
Thank you. Where would you divide between hypnosis and meditation? Where is the difference between hypnosis and meditation?
Between what and meditation?
Hypnosis and meditation.
I could give an answer. I was curious about this myself, and I went for hypnosis. And I think my subjective experience was that mentally I thought, okay, this person's hypnotising me, I'll go with it. And it was like someone in the car saying, change into first, change into second, change into third, and you just did what they did. Whereas meditation was like driving the car yourself. It was that kind of feeling. So I think there are similar, maybe, processes in terms of your consciousness is changing and you're going into your thought processes. But with hypnosis, it's almost like the other person's consciousness is driving it, whereas in meditation, you're driving it. That's one feeling I had. I don't know, Michael, have you ever thought about this question? Or?
Would that not be a way of trying to introduce meditation to somebody who would be worried about meditation and being worried?
Yeah, possibly. Yes, I mean, I think hypnosis has its values and it works for people. But I think it's it feels like a slightly different room in the house you go to somehow. I don't know how else to describe it.
Bring out the same nice feeling.
It can.
Because
yes,
I've done both.
Yes.
And I actually got into meditation through hypnosis.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there, you've answered your own question. I'm aware that we're running out of time and we have a couple more things that we're going to do before we finish. And there will be the traditional ending that we have in this house where we will give you a sweet and a blessing as you leave. So I don't want you to miss that. So if you don't mind, unless anyone has a really burning question, I'd like to just bring us towards the end of this evening. Is that okay? So do stay here. Don't move. And I'd like to invite Rachna to come back and read us a couple more poems to take us into a reflective space, which will be followed with Sister Janti taking us on a reflective journey. Sister Janti will take us through a meditation after Rachna reads her poems.
Thank you, Sarah. So I have two poems now, and for me they perhaps talk a little bit about what might happen during meditation. The first one is called Both Mirror and Glass. Your eyes are like both mirror and glass, and there, in their capacious hold, I find me with you, reflected in our own infinity, that finds itself back through the looking glass in my eyes, as they gaze back into yours, and as your eyes, like both a mirror and glass, capacious in their hold, show you with me, reflected in our own infinity, that finds us, reflections of one another, back and forth, forth and back, until there is nothing to reflect. And the second one is called The Beauty of Love. Finally we meet, and lost I am again, no voice, no thoughts, by love's own sword slain. And what is left? Nothing of me, just a simple falling into myself, a boundless pool made only of love's own calling. And what worth now, carried by years of thought, feeling and deed? An eternity, better than gold, if in the honour of love and love's need, where gold too, unable to resist the warmth of dear love's hold, melts and melds and merges into the vanishing rivers of fool's gold. Undressed it is by love to pure quanta of light, just dances in some ballet, and then undressed again to that beyond any lens might see, a play in a play in a play, where the what is collapses too into the unseen, words too rigid to explain, and where even this observer is swallowed into the beauty of love that does eternally remain. Om Shanti.
Reflecting on so many beautiful thoughts that have been shared, I experiment, letting my thoughts become quiet and coming to the awareness of the world within. I see myself in the inner world, a being of peace, a being of love. This is who I am. The world outside stays out there. And I explore the power of peace and the power of love. I realize that peace is who I am. No search, no struggle, just my natural, original state of being. Comfortable, familiar, real. I am peace. And peace opens the door to the treasures within. And within the being that I am, is love, truth, and compassion. I remember this is who I am. And this is what I share with the world. Om Shanti.
So thank you all very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Sister Jayanti and Michael, for sharing your words, but more for sharing who you are. You're both amazing people, doing amazing stuff in the world, and I think we all...